Welcome to the Wickedly Smart Women podcast, featuring stellar conversations with emerging and established wickedly smart women. Thanks for joining us today as we celebrate women who are committed, care deeply, and have the courage to take action and create conscious change all around the world. Now here's your wickedly smart host, Anjel B. Hartwell.
Welcome to another episode of the Wickedly Smart Women podcast, where we celebrate wickedly smart women and provide our listeners with a wealth of wisdom, along with immediately actionable steps to be smarter, spunkier, and more successful in their impact and their leadership. This is your host, Anjel B. Hartwell, and today we welcome our special guest, Jodi Dee. Jodi is a mother of three and multi-award-winning author. Her books, materials, and resources promote proper growth and development, self-esteem and individuality, and social and emotional intelligence in all ages. She has a master's in education, and she and I had the pleasure of meeting at a live event recently called Spirit of Change here in New England. And as soon as I met her at the event, I said, "Oh, we need to bring you to the show." So welcome, Jodi. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I want to start our time together, Jodi, by asking you, first of all, if you have always been a writer. Like, when you were a kid, did you like to spend time writing? Did you know at some level that you were always going to write, or were you a reader or some combination of both?
You know, I always was a writer, but I was actually intimidated by the English language as I started going through formal schooling. So I think I suppressed my creativity around that for a while. And it wasn't until I got to college that some of my professors said to me that you have a gift, you should be writing. And I did have a teacher, I remember pretty clearly in high school, I was not doing well in this English class, and we had a creative writing assignment instead of, verbs and adverbs and all the things that we get graded on. And she read what I wrote. It was my first draft. I just wrote it off the cuff because it was writing personal topics to me. I journaled a lot as a child and even into my teen years. It was kind of my way of self-cleansing, self-healing, just being able to get my feelings out in a safe place. And she read it in front of the class and as an example of a very well-written story. And I remember thinking, whoa, wow, okay, I guess there is something there. And after that, it was in me. I never thought, though, that I would write fiction. So my passion was always self-help, huge Wayne Dyer fan. I met him twice. He actually met my daughter when she was born because I brought her to one of his conventions in Boston. So I have a picture of him holding her. So I was always, even starting at 14 years old, into self-help, self-awareness, higher consciousness. But it wasn't until I had children that I started, for lack of a better word, channeling ideas for stories. Because I read so many stories with my children. I mean, we would go to the library and get a bag of books. I mean, I always loved the magic and enchantment of children's stories and being able to go into that special place where you could escape anything that was happening. You had these different worlds you could escape into. And we didn't have, movies and TV and on-demand stories like we do now, right? Mm-hmm. We had to get books and immerse ourselves into those images and those words. So I carried that forward with my children. We would, I'm not joking, go to the library every week and max out the amount of books we could check out, even before my children could read, because I realized how expensive it was to buy so many books. Mm. And at that time, I realized, like, my middle daughter is severely dyslexic, and she's the one who spent the most time looking at picture books and studying them. And even to this day, she's very creative and artistic. So at that time, when I started reading so many picture books, I felt like there was this really missing piece in children's literature around spirituality and higher consciousness, and just this whole concept of self-empowerment. You know, a lot of the books are about kindness, which is super important. It's about the things that happen with children, like birthdays and things like that. But there's not a lot, I feel, that really touches that part of knowing that you're in control, that you have the power inside of you to manifest and create whatever you desire. So as I started reading these picture books, I was like, oh my God, like we need real content, like not Dora, and no offense to Dora, she's a great character, but you know, these backpacks that are flying around. Like I wanted real stories that touch real experiences in a magical way.
Yeah,
and
mystical and spiritual. So let me stop you just for a second and ask you, like you said that you were turned on when you were a teenager. Did you come from an environment yourself where there was exposure to a higher level of consciousness and this kind of thinking, or was that this kind of like what I like to call the quinkle? For me, a quinkle is like a synchronistic, coincidental thing, right? Where there's like a sparkle around it. I call it, that's my special word, the quinkle. Did you have a quinkle that woke you up? Did you, like, were you at the library and a book flew off the shelf for you? Or did you actually come yourself from an environment that already fostered this kind of exploration and thinking?
Yeah, I think it was the reverse. I think that I came from, I don't want to say a negative place, because my childhood did have a lot of magic in it. My mother started a preschool when I was very small. So I grew up in this environment, freedom and discovery and imaginative play. Like I'm so grateful. And that's where the Create a Home of Learning book came from. But my father actually had lost his businesses when I was small. I was probably around the age of 9. And it really changed him. It really impacted him, where I felt like the light kind of went out of him. And, you know, we grew up poor, you know, like I think everybody around our age at that time. You know, my father had to file bankruptcy. So there was a lot of, I don't know, I feel like I had the magic and I had that, and then it was taken away somehow. And I can't really pinpoint a time, but my older brother had started drinking when he was 17 or 18. And he also had come out of the closet a few years later, but he went through this deep depression, I guess. And around the time I was 13 or 14. And so he started going to Al-Anon meetings. AA meetings. And he said to me one time, you should go to Al-Anon, or what I can't remember. Alateen was the one. So I was like, you know what? Why not? And I fell in love with the authenticity and the anonymity and the community and the honesty and the rawness, the raw emotion of people in those meetings. And I was just hooked. Like that was it. It changed my life. And now it's transformed into more higher, you know, Esther Hicks. I went through like the Wayne Dyer phase in my 20s to 30s. And then I've kind of moved, I guess, to a different level with it. But the philosophy is the same. I mean, even religions all have that universal truth of oneness and this energy of love and those types of things. So even though I started, I feel like I went through almost like the darkness when I was in my teens and 20s to back to that magic and that higher consciousness. And that's where I really came into wanting to understand emotional intelligence and really make a difference in that space. Because like Esther Hicks, Teachings of Abraham, her thing is your emotions are your guidance system, right? And,
sure.
and using it as not just a GPS to navigate life, but to use it to master. You know, I think that's going to be my next book, or one of my books, my adult title, Master of I, because it's becoming so aware of yourself and the experiences of you that you can transform your life. You know, you're in control. We're in control. And people often, and it's so sad for me that most people feel like they are victims to circumstance. versus they can change that.
Sure.
So,
yeah. So one of the things that, I do want to have our listeners hear is that we do have the power to create change. And one of the things that, happened in your case is you actually created a change for yourself when you wrote your first book. You moved from being a writer to being an author. And that's actually a rite of passage, right? So when we make a change in our life, that is making a rite of passage. So I'd love to have you talk about what was like maybe the one big decision that you made where you said, I am going to author a book. I'm going to become an author. I remember when I wrote my first book, and it wasn't until I got the book in my hands that I recognized that I had made this rite of passage.
I don't know. I still feel like I'm in the passage. But yeah, for me, it's a little different because I have a lot of unfinished books on my computer. And the first one I think I wrote
too.
I never finished, called Being Human Sucks, when I was 20. And there's a title out that's very similar. I think it has the F word in it. I can't remember what the title is, but I laugh a lot because a lot of the books that I didn't have the confidence to publish at the time were topics in current culture and consciousness. So, but as a rite of passage, I wrote Jessie True, my first book, Jessie True, and that I love my Jessie books. I wish I could get more traction on Jessie, and timing will happen. But that was about a little boy who changes color based on how he feels. And for me, I feel like I'm riding the wave of my children's development. Like Jessie was really written when they were in elementary school, and The Dirt Girl was written when they were in later years of elementary school. And then the new books I'm writing now I'm in the middle grade. So I definitely leverage their energy and the friendships, like the kids that are here and the conversations that they're having. And so I don't know if I really have an entrance to the rite of passage. I kind of feel like I'm in the passage. And even when people say that to me now, like, you're an author, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess, because I've been writing my whole life. I can't believe I have physical manifestations of books. I guess you're right. It is kind of a rite of passage.
It is indeed. Well, we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, Jodi, we're going to talk about all of the books that you have written and authored, all of the books that you have authored, and let people know where to find out more about you. But right now, Wickedly Smart Women, we could use your help. If you're enjoying this show and want us to stay on the air, please consider making a donation at www.wickedlysmartwomen.com. We've had some recent fun donations. We just got one from Bulgaria a few weeks ago. We'd also like to ask you to share with your lovely lady friends who you think might benefit from our content. Help a gal out and let your mothers, sisters, daughters, friends, and colleagues know about the show so we can serve them too. I do want to say a huge thank you to all of our listeners who are downloading, rating, and reviewing. We have just moved on Listen Notes. According to Listen Notes, a few months ago, we were at 1.5%. We were in the top 1.5% of all podcasts across all categories across the entire world. And we have just recently moved into the top 1%. So we're really excited and grateful about that. There is one thing that I would really, 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 really love to have happen though, and that would be to have just one download in Wyoming. I look at the 94 countries that are downloading, and for some reason, I'm just not satisfied because Wyoming remains a blank on my map of the US. So I want to shout out today to anybody in the vicinity of Wyoming and ask you to cross the border and make a download. Otherwise, I'm going to have to make that be my summer journey. And I also want to shout out and say thank you to our listeners in Sierra Leone, Colombia, and Morocco. And we will be right back with Jodi Dee.
The Wickedly Smart Women podcast is brought to you by the Wealthy Life Mentor. Women, are you on the edge knowing that life is calling you to make a change? Are you ready to be part of the evolution of what it means to be a wickedly smart woman, creating your wealthy life by design? a life that is an extraordinary work of art. Anjel B. Hartwell, the Wealthy Life Mentor, is hired by women in transition, women just like you who want to break through to their brilliance, become clear on the value of their wisdom, and embody a beauty-filled, balanced life of shameless self-expression. Discover your wealthy life readiness by taking the quiz at quiz.wealthylifementor.com.
And we are back with Jodi Dee. Jodi can be found at jodidee.com. We will give you that URL in the show notes. She has written 7 books. She is authored. She is the author of a multi-award-winning author of 7 books. So Jodi, why don't you tell us about, at least give us the titles of each of the books and a little bit of a snippet about like what the premise is of each of them.
Okay, perfect. Sure.
Yeah.
So there's the Jesse True series, which is about a little boy who changed his color based on how he feels. And I love my Jesse. It's very simple language. And what he does is he goes through normal everyday experiences and processes what's happening. So he's having normal everyday experiences that children have, and he's navigating how to deal with that. So like in one of the stories, this is actually sold as a bundle. There's 4 in the bundle. It is also available at all major retailers, Barnes & Noble, Target, etc. But one story, for example, we deal with anger, where his sister gets stung by a bee and he hates the bees. And then he kind of comes to this awareness that bees are needed and that they're a very important part of nature, and they don't mean to hurt us if we get in their way. They're not getting in our way. We're actually getting in their way, because usually people get stung when they walk in front of a beehive. So one of the things I do merge into all my stories too is this environmental awareness, because I'm a huge environmentalist and I'm a big nature person. I go hiking all the time. Like I would much rather be outside by the ocean or in the woods than inside watching TV. So for me, I want to remind children that there is magic in the natural world. It's not just on a device or in a computer and all this stuff. It's really walking by a stream and being one and present is the higher vibration than watching some crazy show with all this animation. So all of my books. And then the 4th book of Jesse is about a bully and how Jesse owns his power, and he learns to not let this. And of course, this isn't a bully that's physically hurting Jesse. This is just someone who continues to tease him and get a rise out of him. And he uses his changing color as what color can he change Jesse? And then when Jesse starts to realize that he's in control of his emotions, the bully can't change his color, and the bully gives up. Like he realizes he beats the bully. So that's one of my favorite stories. That's in the 4-book bundle. The other book is The Dirt Girl. And The Dirt Girl actually was one of the best-selling books on Amazon last week, I think in birthdays, which I was pretty surprised.
Yay! Congratulations. Where's my bell? I want to ring the bell for you.
Ring the bell. I can do my little Buddhist bowl. But yeah, I was surprised. One of my colleagues, who is also an author, he's wonderful, texted me and he's like, hey, you're like in the top 18 of books for The Dirt Girl. I was like, whoa, pretty cool. But The Dirt Girl is about a little girl who's different. And again, she's a nature girl. She's what we would call an earth person, a earth child, or back when we were kids. And so she's a gardener. She comes to school with dirt on her hands and sticks in her clothes are handmade. And she has ladybugs in her backpack. And so she's really one with nature, and they all think she's super weird. So they ignore her and they tease her when she first gets there, but then they kind of just ignore her. But then she has a birthday party and invites everyone to her house, and they realize she lives in this magical natural world, and they're all amazed by how she lives. And so now they all want to be like her, and she becomes the most popular girl in school. So that's that everybody loves that title. It's a good one. Then I have The Little Green Jacket, which again, you'll see my themes throughout all my stories. This is about a little green jacket that travels through the lives of different children as a donation and as a hand-me-down or a hand-me-up. So I try to break the demographic that recycled goods just go to the poor. This really showcases that hand-me-downs or trading clothes, I don't even like the hand-me-downs, is a big part of our culture, and it's very important. And every time we would get, even I'm much more well off than when I was growing up, but even with my children, when we would swap a bag of clothes with a cousin or a friend that had older girls, it was like Christmas morning. They would have all these clothes for dress up, or just have a whole new outfit, a whole new closet, a wardrobe that you now have that, and it's recycled. So it keeps products out of the landfill. So this book showcases, there's actually two voices in the story. The protagonist is actually a little green jacket. And so the jacket is reflecting on how all the children are the same. And they all have, even though they're all from very different places around the world and across the country, inner city to a farm, but they all have these commonalities. So the jacket is having one experience and the children are having another about this jacket that's so lucky. So that's also an award-winning book, and hopefully it's in Target soon, in stores. So I love that book, and the illustrations in all of my stories, which, cool fact, I have illustrators from all over the world, and I am so grateful and privileged to be able to have. I have a one from Colombia, Algeria, Iran. My most recent book was from a girl who's going now to get her master's in art in the UK from Iran. And, these artists don't have the privileges we have here. So to be able to not only give them business and recognition of their artwork, it's just like a wonderful world community that I'm able to tap into.
Beautiful. Well, yeah. I want, that was one of my questions. So you definitely are on the psychic hotline, Jodi. I was like, I wonder who the artist is. And so thank you for answering that question. And so I've heard now about 6 books. There's probably one more that you have to share with us. But before we go into that, I do want to ask you, because a lot of the listeners to the show here are probably moms, possibly parents. Often they are entrepreneurial. Either they have their own business or they're doing things on the side. I'd like to ask you about the business side of your business, especially having had a dad who went bankrupt. Right. And I'd love to have you speak, if you wouldn't mind, briefly about, what, if anything, like maybe what was the number one biggest challenge that you found internally that you needed to overcome in order to be able to not only step into your role as an author, but also step into your role as a businesswoman?
I think the business part of it was much easier for me because it's not as personal, right? So I feel like I'm still overcoming this. You're more vulnerable when you're presenting something that's personal that you've created. So I'm still working on that. Like, you'd look at my books and the awards and you'd say, oh, why she's got. No, I still struggle. Like, it's hard for me to accept recognition, or I'm still like that high school, girl that people, if they're evaluating my work, no matter how many people tell me, like, you could have every person probably in the world tell me that I'm a good author, and it still would be an internal challenge for myself to get better and be better and to acknowledge that that's what's happening. Right. So that, I think, is always evolving. I think it's part of our evolution as humans. I mean, it's part of expansion as an individual and expansion as a self. But the business part, I was lucky because, again, I grew up, which is a good segue into the next book, and to the moms out there, I was lucky because I grew up in an early learning center. And I mean, my mother was on the cutting edge of early childhood, and she still is. I mean, she dedicated her life to that area. And she just wrote a bill for the state trying to raise funds for early childhood. And she's still heavily involved in her 70s. I think she's 70. She'll be mad if I give the wrong age, so I won't say it. So I grew up in this environment and I recreated it for my children, but it's this environment that you're learning math through playing with the right types of toys. You're learning math by using manipulatives, and you have these building blocks and these magnet blocks that you can create any tower you can imagine. And those toys evolve with you and grow with you in your development as a child if you have the right toys. So the magnet blocks, for example, when you're 2, you start to recognize there's different shapes. So you recognize the square and the circle and the triangle. But then when you're 5 and 6, you realize that you can build by putting the squares together. You can make a box, and then you put the triangles together. You can make a roof. And then when you're 7 and 8, now you're having imaginative play, and you're creating a city for your Matchbox cars to go into or for your figurines to go into. So if you have the right types of toys, you're naturally encouraging and supporting your child's development. So I grew up in a preschool from 0 to 20. And I was able to learn, and I worked in there when I was 7. I was helping make Play-Doh and facilitate activities. So I had every facet. So I tell people I have like a master's degree in early childhood that I didn't even try to get. I just learned through osmosis. So then when I had children, which leads into this other book, and this is, I'm saying this to answer your question, because I think that for moms and parents, giving your children these resources will create this entrepreneur type child, and not just the type A child that's going to go start a business. Like my oldest child is very conservative. And I mean, if you saw us together, you'd say that cannot be, other than probably looking alike, you would say, wow, you guys are totally different, because her personality is very artistic. I mean, I'm not artistic in the sense of drawing or being able to sketch or things like that. Like mine is all etheric and in the written word. But her talent, she can draw. She's also a fabulous writer, which she doesn't honor, but I think she'll probably be a better writer than I am. Like when I read her writing, I'm like, oh my God, I wish you could write my dialogue. And then I have my middle daughter, who also is not an academic, but she is a crafter. She's the one who's dyslexic. And she comes up with these things that sometimes I'm in amazement that she's 13 years old, even when she was 9, creating these things with the resources that were available to her. But she also grew up in this environment of having all these little workspaces with the right toys to be able to discover and figure things out on their own. Like it wasn't instruction based. It wasn't academic led. It was certainly screen free. So that was this book, the Create a Home of Learning book. I outline exactly how to do this in a home environment, like accredited preschool centers do around the country in the US. I mean, obviously we have for readers that are not in the US, it's also available by ebook, because there may not be available in their countries, but it's on KDP. I have it in the free lending library as well. I just wish anybody who wants it, go get it. Like it's out there as a resource for free, because this is how we're going to change the world, is giving children, your brain triples in size between the ages of 0 and 2. We're not capitalizing on that. And if you can capitalize. So for me on the business side, like I felt like I had every tool I could imagine. Like I knew how to do accounting.
Yeah.
I played with a calculator. I played with a cash register when I was 2 and 3 and 4. And we created stores when I was 4 and 5. Like we had fake stores. There's just so many things. We would play post office. We would play office. We would play school. And my children did the same thing, because I had those resources. I had a little area and I facilitated those activities. So all of them, I feel, are at a higher level or started at a higher level. Like now, you start to level off more when you get into your teen years.
Yeah. But and we're actually going to have to stop, Jodi. I apologize, but we are actually at the end of the show. So I want to encourage our listeners to go to jodid.com, find out more, because obviously Jodi could speak about our topic for a long time. And she is here to help you to create a home of learning and also to create more consciousness in your children through her vast array of books that she is in the process of creating and distributing all over the world. Jodi, thank you so much for being here today. Listeners, we love feedback. Please do let us know what you thought of today's show by calling into our listener line. We'll have that for you in the show notes, or you can send in questions or guest suggestions to listeners at wickedlysmartwomen.com. We might even give you a shout out on the show. Thanks for tuning in. Keep your ears open, and remember, you are a wonderful woman.
Thanks for tuning in, downloading, and listening. Be sure to rate and review Wickedly Smart Women on Apple Podcasts and share with other women who can benefit from today's episode. Wickedly Smart Women is the premier podcast series for informing, activating, and inspiring the leader who carries profound wisdom and knows that now is the time to welcome wealth. We welcome your feedback and guest suggestions and invite you to subscribe to our mailing list to be notified of each new episode at wickedlysmartwomen.com.